Hi everyone, and welcome to another Aspericity video tutorial. I'm Mike D'Souza, and today I'm going to be talking to you about how to set up a virtual private server with Nginx and MySQL. So in this tutorial, we will prepare a VPS with a baseline installation of Nginx and MySQL, so that in the next video, we can deploy the React blog we created in the previous video, along with our Node.js app and our Headless Ghost CMS. Now, if you already have an existing server, feel free to skip ahead to the next video in this tutorial series. Otherwise, there are a few prerequisites that are required before we can dive into this tutorial. So the first is that you have a VPS already set up with a domain name and a user with sudo group permissions. Now, you can usually get a VPS instance pretty cheap, or it scales all the way up in cost and functionality, and you can get those from providers such as DigitalOcean or Vultr or AWS, or there's a number of cloud providers that will provide you with this service. And as well, they usually have tutorials for setting up the DNS records and have links to how to get a domain name from a domain name provider, or may actually provide domain names themselves. So if for some reason you have not got that VPS ready to go, or you don't have an existing site and you want some additional information, I've set up some prerequisite setup links here. So the first is from Ghost itself, and it talks about how to set up a user with permissions, as well as some of the things that we'll cover in this tutorial as well, such as Nginx and MySQL. Now, if you just want the initial server setup, and for this tutorial we're going to use Ubuntu 18.04, and that's an LTS version of Ubuntu, not quite the most recent, but pretty recent still. So we will set that up with a user with administrative privileges, with UFW, which is the default firewall that comes with Ubuntu, and as well you may want to set up your server with SSH key authentication, which would take the place of using a password and user ID. So instead you would use a public-private key pair, and this guide will actually walk you through that for Linux and Mac. But if you want to use Windows, I've also included an optional setup guide that will allow you to do the key gen with PuTTY, and then you would still use this other guide to do the portion that was actually on the server to set up the key. So without further ado, I'm going to scroll down. So once you have your VPS set up and you have a user with rights, sudo admin rights, and as well you've got your DNS and your domain name set up, the next step is we're going to want to go ahead and install and set up Nginx. And we're going to use Nginx as a reverse proxy for the Node.js app that we're creating, but we're not going to do that in this video. We'll do that in the next video. For this video, we just simply want to set up a baseline version of Nginx. So let's go ahead and open our terminal, and we can log in first. And you can see here I'm going to do an SSH with my username and the host name of the server. And we can see that we've logged in without me having to put in a user ID or password. So that's one of the sort of like conveniences of doing that optional SSH key authentication. As well, it's just a little bit more secure because you don't have to worry about your password getting phished. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a sudo apt-get update. And that's just going to update our packages on Ubuntu. And once that's done, we're just going to go and do a sudo apt-get upgrade. And this may take a little while, but I did this update just beforehand, and hopefully it shouldn't take too much here. If it does, I'll stop the video and come back in a moment. Nope, we're good. That was still quite quick. as I mentioned, it may be much longer for you guys if you haven't done that upgrade recently. So next, we can actually go ahead and install Nginx. Select yes. And this should only take a moment. And so now that that is run successfully, we can do a systemctl status Nginx. And we can see that it's already started the Nginx server. So depending on what you've done with your installation of your VPS or what your provider does, it may already have the default firewall active. And if it is active, it's probably set to block HTTP traffic. So let's scroll down. And so the next step is to configure the default firewall that comes with Ubuntu. So we're actually going to set up the firewall to temporarily allow both HTTP and HTTPS, but we will show you later in the video how to remove HTTP if you decide just to go with the SSL version of HTTP. So the first thing we need to do is we need to do a sudo UFW app list. And now we can see that we have Nginx available as an application we can run on the firewall. So we're going to do a sudo UFW allow Nginx full, and that'll give us both HTTP and HTTPS. And now we can just make sure that that is correct by running UFW status. And we can see now that we have both the open SSH rule that I set up when we set up the VPS server before this video as part of the prerequisites. And we also have our Nginx full. So that'll provide HTTP and HTTPS. Okay, so last step is to go ahead and sudo UFW. And now I could do an enable if I hadn't got my firewall already running, but since I do, I'm going to do a reload. And now we should be able to go ahead and take a look at this. So if we go over to our browser and we go to test.asperity.com, and there we have it. We've got our hello world from Nginx, or welcome to Nginx. So we've got our firewall set. We've got our Nginx set. We have just checked our web server. And now we're ready to go ahead and configure Nginx. So the first step in configuring Nginx is we're going to actually add a specific directory for our web content. So, and specific to our domain. Now you may notice that I don't have test.asperity.com, and this is because if we're going to use this across multiple environments, say a test environment or a staging environment, and then to production, we're going to want to keep this directory structure the same across all of those. So I'm just going to go and copy this and we'll get started. So we'll start by creating that directory, and then the next step, and I'm just going to copy all of these commands rather than type them out. Here we're going to actually do a copy, and we're just copying the default Nginx index file, and we're copying it to an index file in that directory. And we just renamed it as well to just the normal index.html. And then we're going to set ownership recursively to our user for the entire HTML directory. Sorry, we're setting the ownership there. And now we're going to do permissions. So we're changing the permissions to read, execute, and write for the owner, and then for group and everyone, just the read and execute for that directory, that main directory there. And then lastly, we're going to set the permissions for the actual index file that we just created to read, write for the user, and group as well, and then just for everyone else that can read it. And then lastly, we're going to go and edit this we're going to create a new configuration file specifically for our domain in Nginx. And so by doing it this way, we're not overwriting the default configuration from Nginx. So that's kind of nice. So I've started my text editor here with Nano, and I'm just going to copy this, and I'll explain it as we copy it in. So I've copied that file in. Oops, go up by keyboard. So this is just saying we're going to listen on port 80. Our web root is the directory we created. We're going to look for any of these index.html file variants. And then as well, our server name is test.aspericity.com. And lastly, this is just saying that we'll either, when somebody makes a URL request, we're going to try that URL, or we're going to try that URL with a slash appended. And if neither of those return anything, then we're going to return a 404 error. Okay, so let's save that. Control X, Y, enter, and we've saved that file. So now the next step is that we're going to create a symbolic link. Oh, and I can just see that there's a small problem here. So I'm just going to go and quickly change that. There's a space missing in that file right here. I'm going to come back. Just copy it again. So I'm going to create a dynamic or symbolic link from the sites available to the sites enabled. And that's just going to make it such that this site is enabled on our Nginx server. I'll hit enter to do that. And as mentioned in the line above that, for the previous code, we just need to make sure that the server name reflects all of the appropriate domain names for your site. So, for example, for your production site, you may have www. And then your domain name, and just your domain name without the www, and both of those would be valid URLs. So just make sure that they would both be in the server name here. So this is a good example: server name space example.com space www.example.com. Okay. So now we're going to update. We have to make a small change to the Nginx main configuration file. And so we're just going to go down, and all we have to do is find this server names hash bucket and remove this hashtag that's, or # that's making that a comment. So we actually want to activate that. We'll just save that. And now we're going to run this sudo nginxt, and that's just going to check the syntax to make sure that everything's okay and the test is successful. So it seems like it is. And we can go ahead and restart Nginx. And let's just go quickly over here and run a refresh. And now what we can see is that we've got test.aspericity.com, but we don't really know. Did that work? Are we pointing at that new file now? So let's just go back quickly, and we're going to just do a quick modification on that file. So let's go sudo nano var www html aspericity.com /index.html. I can see a small little, oh yeah, sorry, it says HTML. So HTML /index.html. So actually it's correct. Okay. Maybe I've got a mistake in directory structure. Yeah, I put HTML in the front here. So, okay, let's try that one more time. There we go. Okay, so we're going to say welcome to Aspericity test, and that's the title tag. So we also need to come down here and do it in our H1 tag. So welcome to Aspericity test. Okay, we'll save, yes, enter, go back to our browser, reload, and lo and behold, yeah, we're using the aspericity.com block in Nginx. Okay. So now I'm going to scroll down. And the next step is to go ahead and install and configure Let's Encrypt. So this is to set up a certificate for secure socket layer. So the first step is that we're going to install certbot. So I'm just going to copy this add at repository command. And that's going to add the repository for certbot. Click enter to continue. And then as well, I'm going to install this python.certbot Nginx once this completes. And once that completes, we're actually going to go ahead and run the certbot command with Nginx. And again, if you have multiple domains, we're going to do this -d example.com -d www.example.com. But for our example, since we're using a subdomain, we only have one, which is this test.aspericity.com. So I'm going to run that. And I need to enter an email address. And I'm just going to agree to the terms of service. And now it's going to ask me, do I want to get emails from the EFF? And I've already done that, so I'm going to say no. And now it's checking to make sure it can reach the site. And we can see that it has been successful in getting a certificate. So now it's asking, do you want to redirect HTTP traffic to HTTPS? So in my case, the answer is yes. So I'm going to pick 2. But if you want HTTP traffic as well as HTTPS, then you would pick 1. So we'll pick 2. It's going to redirect. It's going to actually go and edit the file. It makes a backup, so don't worry about it like overwriting your file and creating issues. So, and now it's gone ahead and successfully created those certificates. So now the next step, because these certificates expire after a certain amount of time, we're actually going to run a renew command for certbot, but we're going to do it with this --dry run option. And again, it's going to try to talk to the site, make sure that it gets a verification. And if everything's happy, it's going to come back and say that all renewals succeeded. So we're good to go. So the next step is, as I said, if you want to remove HTTP, then we're going to go ahead and do a sudo ufw delete allow nginx full. And we've deleted that. Now we have to add back the nginx HTTPS. And now let's just do another sudo ufw status. And now we can see that we've only got HTTPS, but we still want to do one last thing, and that is make sure that our renewal works just with HTTPS. So let's go ahead and do that, because that should work with the redirect. And lo and behold, it succeeded. So it doesn't always succeed, so make sure you try that. I've had some issues where it's been kind of flaky. Okay. So the last step that we have to do is actually go ahead and install MySQL. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the installation. And while that's running, I'll mention that for certain versions of Ubuntu, you don't have to do anything. That's all you need to do. But from 1804 onwards, I believe, you actually need to set up a password for this root localhost user that is the sort of default user that gets put in with MySQL. So we'll go ahead and do that. Just copy this command. And then obviously what we're going to need to do is replace the password with an actual different password, hopefully a bit more secure. So I'm going to use something, some example version here for the time being, and I'll change it after this video, but yeah, absolutely you should use something that's fairly secure here. So we'll use this value here. Oops, scroll back down. Oh, maybe I just hit this, yeah. So we'll use this value here. Okay. And lastly, we can quit. And we don't actually need to switch users since we're already on our test admin. So this is if you were en route doing this. Okay, so that completes the setup of your VPS baseline. The MySQL that we just installed, it will be used by Ghost, and you'll need that password that we set up. So yeah, and we'll talk about how to set up Ghost, how to set up MySQL for Ghost, and as well our React blog and the Node.js app in our next video. So the code for this video, or more accurately, the test React and test Node repositories that contain the React blog and the Node app are available publicly at github.aspericity. Otherwise, I just want to say a great big thank you to you guys for watching this video. If it was useful, please go ahead and hit like. If you're interested in more videos like this, please hit subscribe. If you have any comments, suggestions, or questions, leave a comment in the section below. Otherwise, stick around for the last video in this series where we deploy the React blog to this server and also set up our Node.js app and our Ghost CMS. Thanks.